In the shadowed halls of the royal court, where power determined fate and mercy was a forgotten word, a young slave girl's destiny was sealed with the stroke of a pen. King Roderick had promised her to Lord Blackwood, a nobleman whose cruelty was legendary even among the ruthless aristocracy. But on the day of her forced wedding, when all hope seemed lost and her fate appeared sealed forever, an unexpected figure burst through the chapel doors. Sometimes, salvation comes from the most unlikely source, and sometimes, a prince's heart can defy a kingdom. This is the story of how love conquered power, and how one moment of courage changed 3 lives forever. Are you ready to witness what happens when a prince risks everything for a slave? If you love epic medieval stories with shocking plot twists, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more incredible tales, and hit that bell icon so you never miss our latest stories. The stone floors of Castle Valenhall were cold beneath Seraphina's bare feet as she knelt in the servants' quarters, scrubbing the endless stains from the noble's garments. At 19, she possessed a beauty that seemed almost ethereal despite her lowly station. Golden hair that caught the light like spun silk even when dirty and tangled, violet eyes that held depths of intelligence and compassion, and a grace in her movements that spoke of noble blood, though none knew her true origins. Seraphina had been a slave in the royal household since childhood, her past shrouded in mystery. The only clue to her heritage was a small sapphire pendant she wore hidden beneath her rough servant's dress, a trinket she had clutched in her infant hands when she was found abandoned at the castle gates 19 years ago. Seraphina! The harsh voice of Mistress Agatha, the head of servants, echoed through the chamber. The king demands your presence in the throne room. Now. Fear gripped Seraphina's heart. In her years of service, she had rarely been summoned before King Roderick, and such summons usually meant punishment or worse. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and followed Mistress Agatha through the winding corridors, her mind racing with possibilities. The throne room was filled with the usual collection of nobles and courtiers, their silk garments and jeweled accessories a stark contrast to Seraphina's simple brown dress. King Roderick sat upon his golden throne, his cold blue eyes fixed upon her as she approached. Beside him stood Lord Blackwood, a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him wherever he went. Tall and imposing, with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that held no warmth. "Ah, Seraphina!" King Roderick's voice boomed across the chamber. "Step forward, girl." She obeyed, keeping her eyes downcast as she had been taught. The nobles whispered among themselves, and she could feel their curious gazes upon her. "Lord Blackwood has served our crown faithfully for many years," the king continued, his voice carrying a note of finality. "He has requested a reward for his loyalty, and I have decided to grant it. You, Seraphina, are to become his bride." The words hit her like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the chamber, not from shock at the king's decision, but from surprise that a mere slave would be given such a honor. Seraphina's legs nearly gave way beneath her, but she forced herself to remain standing. "Your Majesty," she whispered, finding her voice despite her terror. I am but a servant. Surely Lord Blackwood deserves." "Silence." Roderick's fist slammed against his throne. "You will speak only when spoken to. Lord Blackwood finds you suitable for his needs. The ceremony will take place in 3 days' time." The news of the upcoming wedding spread through the castle like wildfire, igniting whispers and speculation in every corner. In the servants' quarters, the other slaves looked upon Seraphina with a mixture of pity and relief. Pity for her fate, and relief that they had been spared. "Lord Blackwood's last wife lasted only 6 months," whispered Martha, an elderly kitchen servant, as she helped Seraphina mend a torn dress. "Found at the bottom of the stairs," they said. "Terrible accident." "His second wife disappeared entirely," added young Thomas, a stable boy. "Some say she ran away. Others say she never left the castle walls." Seraphina listened to these tales with growing dread, but she also noticed something else. The unusual interest that Prince Adrian, the king's eldest son, had begun showing in the servants' area. The prince, known for his kind heart and sense of justice, had been seen speaking quietly with several servants, asking questions that seemed unrelated to his usual duties. Prince Adrian was everything his father was not. Where King Roderick was cruel, Adrian was compassionate. Where the king was ruthless, the prince sought justice. At 25, he possessed the noble bearing expected of royalty but tempered with genuine warmth that endeared him to both nobles and commoners alike. His dark brown hair and gentle green eyes were often seen in the castle's lower levels, much to his father's disapproval. On the second day before her forced wedding, as Seraphina worked alone in the castle's chapel, cleaning the altar where she would soon be bound to Lord Blackwood, she heard soft footsteps behind her. "You shouldn't be here alone," came a gentle voice she recognized immediately. She spun around to find Prince Adrian standing in the doorway, his expression troubled. Quickly dropping into a curtsy, she kept her eyes fixed on the stone floor. "Your Highness, I was only cleaning." "Rise, Seraphina," he said softly. "There's no need for such formality when we're alone." Hesitantly, she lifted her gaze to meet his, seeing in his green eyes a kindness she had rarely encountered in the castle. But she also saw something else, anger, barely contained beneath his noble composure. "This wedding," he said, stepping closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "You know what kind of man Lord Blackwood is." It wasn't a question, and Seraphina found herself nodding despite her fear. "Yes, Your Highness. But the king has commanded it, and I am only a slave. I have no choice in the matter." Prince Adrian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Every person has choices, Seraphina. Some are just harder to see than others." "Your Highness." She looked at him with confusion, unsure of his meaning. "Tell me," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Do you remember anything of your life before the castle? Anything at all?" The question surprised her, and she instinctively reached for the hidden pendant at her throat. "Only fragments, my lord. Dreams, perhaps." "Why do you ask?" Before he could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the chapel. Lord Blackwood himself entered, his dark eyes immediately narrowing as he took in the scene before him. "Your Highness," Blackwood said, his voice carefully controlled but with an undertone of menace. "I was not aware you had business in the chapel." Prince Adrian straightened, every inch the royal heir. "I go where I please in my father's castle, Lord Blackwood. As will you, once you remember your place." The tension between Prince Adrian and Lord Blackwood crackled through the chapel like lightning before a storm. Seraphina remained frozen between them, acutely aware that she was witnessing a confrontation that could have far-reaching consequences. Lord Blackwood's lips curved into what might have been called a smile on anyone else, but on his face, it resembled more the baring of teeth. "Of course, Your Highness. I merely came to inspect my future bride, to ensure she understands her duties." "Her duties?" Prince Adrian's voice carried a dangerous edge. "And what duties would those be, my lord?" "Obedience. Silence. Service." Blackwood's cold gaze fixed on Seraphina, who shrank back instinctively. "The same duties any wife owes her husband, though perhaps more thoroughly enforced in her case." The implied threat hung heavy in the air, and Seraphina saw Prince Adrian's jaw clench. For a moment, she feared he might strike the nobleman, but the prince maintained his composure with visible effort. "I see," Adrian said quietly. "And tell me, Lord Blackwood, what makes you believe the king will honor this arrangement indefinitely?" Something flickered across Blackwood's features, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "I don't understand your meaning, Your Highness." "Don't you?" Prince Adrian stepped forward, his presence suddenly more commanding. "You see, I've been conducting some research into your family's history. Fascinating reading, truly. Particularly the parts concerning your grandfather's activities during the rebellion of the Silver Crown." Blackwood went very still. "That was decades ago, Your Highness. Ancient history. Ancient, yes. But not forgotten." The prince's smile was as cold as winter moonlight. "You see, treason charges have no statute of limitations in this kingdom. And evidence, well, evidence has a way of surfacing when one knows where to look." Seraphina watched this exchange with growing confusion and hope. She didn't understand the political undercurrents, but she could see that Prince Adrian held some kind of power over Lord Blackwood. "What do you want?" Blackwood asked, his voice barely above a growl. "Nothing you're prepared to give," Adrian replied smoothly. "But we'll revisit this conversation soon. Very soon, I think." With that cryptic statement, the prince turned to Seraphina. "Continue your work, child. And remember, sometimes the darkest hour comes just before the dawn." After he left, Lord Blackwood approached Seraphina with predatory slowness. She could smell the wine on his breath, see the cruel gleam in his eyes. "Listen well, girl," he hissed, grabbing her wrist with painful force. "Whatever game the prince thinks he's playing, it won't save you. Tomorrow you become mine, and I promise you'll learn what true submission means. My previous wives were instructive in showing me how to break a woman's spirit." Tears sprang to Seraphina's eyes, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Yes, my lord," she whispered. "Good." His grip tightened. "And if you think the prince's interest in you is anything more than political maneuvering, you're even more foolish than I thought. Princes don't fall in love with slaves, child. They use them and discard them like everything else." That night, alone in her small chamber, Seraphina held the sapphire pendant and prayed to whatever gods might listen. She didn't pray for rescue, she had learned long ago not to hope for miracles. Instead, she prayed for strength to endure whatever awaited her, and for the courage to maintain her dignity in the face of Lord Blackwood's cruelty. But in the castle's highest tower, Prince Adrian paced his chambers like a caged wolf, surrounded by ancient documents and correspondence that painted a picture of treachery and hidden truths. Time was running short, and he had one chance, one desperate gamble that could save an innocent girl and expose a traitor. The question was, would he be brave enough to take it? The morning of the wedding dawned gray and cold, as if the heavens themselves mourned what was to come. Castle Valenhall bustled with activity as servants prepared for the ceremony that would bind Seraphina to Lord Blackwood. The great hall had been decorated with banners and flowers, though their beauty seemed mockingly inappropriate for what everyone knew would be a union of convenience and cruelty. In the servants' quarters, Elena and Martha helped Seraphina prepare for her wedding day. The dress provided by Lord Blackwood was beautiful but felt like a shroud, white silk adorned with pearls, designed to showcase his new possession rather than honor a bride. "You look like an angel," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "A beautiful angel." Seraphina caught her reflection in the small mirror and barely recognized herself. The elegant gown transformed her from servant to lady, but her violet eyes held a sadness that no amount of finery could disguise. "Remember," Martha said quietly, "whatever happens, you are stronger than you know. Your spirit cannot be broken unless you allow it." A heavy knock interrupted their quiet moment. "It is time," announced Sir Garrett, one of the king's guards. The walk to the chapel felt eternal and far too brief at the same time. Nobles lined the corridors, whispering behind their fans and jeweled hands as the slave girl passed in her wedding finery. Seraphina kept her chin high, determined to face her fate with dignity. The chapel was packed with witnesses, not guests, for who would celebrate such a union, but observers drawn by curiosity and the spectacle of a nobleman taking a slave as his bride. Lord Blackwood waited at the altar in his finest robes, his expression one of satisfied possession. King Roderick presided over the ceremony himself, seated on a portable throne brought specially for the occasion. His cold blue eyes showed neither kindness nor cruelty, merely indifference to the fate of one insignificant servant. But as Seraphina walked down the aisle, she noticed something that made her heart skip. Prince Adrian was conspicuously absent. In all her years at the castle, she had never known him to miss a royal ceremony. His empty seat in the front row seemed to glare at her with possibilities she dared not contemplate. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice echoing through the stone chamber, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Lord Aldwin Blackwood and the servant Seraphina in holy matrimony." The words felt like physical blows. Each phrase of the ceremony brought her closer to a fate she could barely comprehend. Lord Blackwood's eyes never left her face, and she could see the anticipation of ownership in his gaze. "If any person can show just cause why these two may not be joined together," the priest continued. Let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The traditional words had barely left the priest's lips when the chapel doors exploded open with a tremendous crash that shook dust from the ancient rafters. Prince Adrian strode through the doorway, but he was not alone. Behind him marched a contingent of royal guards, their armor gleaming and their faces grim with purpose. The prince himself was dressed in full ceremonial armor, a scroll of parchment clutched in his gauntlet hand. The assembly erupted in gasps and murmurs. King Roderick rose from his throne, his face darkening with rage. Adrian! What is the meaning of this interruption? Father! Prince Adrian's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the chapel. I come bearing news that will interest this assembly greatly. News of treason, betrayal, and the true identity of the woman you are condemning to this mockery of marriage. Lord Blackwood had gone pale, his confident demeanor cracking like ice in spring. You dare interrupt my wedding with these accusations? Your wedding? Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. This ceremony is based on fraud, my lord. For the woman you seek to claim is not the nameless slave you believe her to be. The chapel fell into absolute silence as Prince Adrian's words echoed through the sacred space. Every eye was fixed upon him as he approached the altar with measured steps, the scroll in his hand crackling with the weight of revelation. Explain yourself, Adrian, King Roderick commanded, though his voice held a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. Prince Adrian unrolled the parchment and began to read in a voice that carried to every corner of the chapel. By royal decree of King William of Astoria, dated 19 years past, let it be known that Princess Serafina of Astoria, my beloved daughter and heir, has been secreted away for her protection during these troubled times. She bears the mark of our house, a sapphire pendant bearing the royal seal, and shall be restored to her rightful place when peace returns to our land. Gasps echoed through the assembly. Serafina's hand flew instinctively to her throat, where the hidden pendant lay beneath her wedding dress. Her legs trembled as the impossible truth began to sink in. Lies! Lord Blackwood snarled, but his voice cracked with desperation. Clever lies designed to. Show them, Prince Adrian commanded, his green eyes fixed on Serafina with gentle encouragement. Show them the proof you've carried all these years without knowing its significance. With shaking fingers, Serafina reached beneath the neckline of her dress and withdrew the sapphire pendant she had treasured since childhood. As it caught the light streaming through the chapel windows, the assembled nobles could clearly see the intricate royal seal of Astoria carved into its surface. King Roderick's face had gone ashen. Astoria had been a wealthy neighboring kingdom before it fell to civil war 19 years ago. The royal family had been presumed dead, their vast treasures and territories absorbed by surrounding kingdoms, including substantial portions that had come under Roderick's control. But how? The king began. How did I discover the truth? Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. It began when I noticed Lord Blackwood's unusual interest in this particular servant. You see, my lord, your agents in Astoria were not as discreet as you believed when they reported the infant princess's escape 19 years ago. Blackwood's face contorted with rage and fear. You have no proof. Don't I? Adrian produced another document. This is a letter from your late steward, confessing on his deathbed how you ordered him to ensure the Astorian princess never reached safety. How you intended to claim her crown through marriage once she came of age. But your agents failed to find her because she was already here, hidden in plain sight among our servants. The prince turned to address the stunned assembly. Lord Blackwood has spent 19 years positioning himself to claim the Astorian throne through marriage to its rightful heir. But his plans required her to remain ignorant of her true identity, a powerless slave he could control and manipulate. Furthermore, Adrian continued, his voice rising, I have evidence that Lord Blackwood orchestrated the civil war that destroyed Astoria in the first place, also he could eventually claim its crown. He is guilty not just of treason against our kingdom, but of genocide against an entire nation. Serafina felt the world spinning around her. Princess. The revelation was too enormous to comprehend. All her life, She had been a nameless servant, and now, seize him. King Roderick commanded, his political instincts taking over despite his shock. Whatever else Blackwood might be, his crimes against a neighboring royal house could not be ignored without consequences. But Lord Blackwood had not survived decades of political maneuvering without developing survival instincts. As the guards moved toward him, he lunged forward and grabbed Seraphina, pressing a jeweled dagger to her throat. "Stay back," he snarled. "Princess or slave, she dies if anyone comes closer. I'll not hang for treason based on forged documents and royal theatrics." The blade pressed against Seraphina's neck, and she felt a thin line of blood well up beneath its edge. In that moment of mortal terror, her eyes found Prince Adrian's, and she saw something there that gave her strength. Not just determination to save her, but something deeper, something that made her heart race even in the face of death. Love. Real, true, desperate love. The standoff in the chapel stretched taut as a bowstring, every person frozen in place as Lord Blackwood held the dagger to Princess Seraphina's throat. The blade gleamed in the candlelight, and a thin trickle of blood stained the white silk of her wedding dress. "Let her go, Blackwood," Prince Adrian said, his voice carefully controlled despite the anguish in his eyes. "Your quarrel is with the crown, not with her." "My quarrel?" Blackwood laughed, but it was the sound of a man pushed beyond reason. "My quarrel is with 20 years of careful planning destroyed by a lovesick prince who couldn't mind his own affairs. Do you think I don't see how you look at her? How you've watched her from afar all these months?" Heat flooded Seraphina's cheeks even as terror gripped her heart. She had noticed Prince Adrian's attention, but had never dared to hope it meant anything more than kindness to a servant. "You speak of love," Blackwood continued, pressing the blade more firmly against her throat, causing her to gasp. "But love is weakness. I would have made her a queen, my queen, and together we would have ruled 2 kingdoms. Instead, you offer her what? The impossible dream of a prince marrying beneath his station." King Roderick stepped forward, his face a mask of cold calculation. "Release the girl, and I will consider clemency. Continue this madness, and I'll see you drawn and quartered in the castle courtyard." "Clemency!" Blackwood spat. "From the king who allowed his son to ruin 20 years of political alliance? You need me, Roderick. Without my eastern territories, your kingdom is vulnerable to attack from 3 sides." "Not as vulnerable as you believe," Adrian interjected, pulling yet another document from his armor. "You see, while you were planning to claim Astoria through fraud and murder, I was negotiating a legitimate alliance with Astoria's surviving nobles in exile. Princess Seraphina's restoration to her rightful throne will bring our kingdoms together through genuine friendship, not coercion." The words hit Seraphina like a thunderbolt. Not only was she a princess, but Adrian had been working to restore her kingdom? The implications were staggering. Blackwood's grip tightened on both Seraphina and the dagger. "Impossible. I made sure no legitimate heirs survived." "You made sure no legitimate heirs were found," Adrian corrected. "But Astoria's nobility always suspected their princess lived. They've been waiting for proof of her survival to rally around her banner. The war that's been tearing apart your eastern borders? Those aren't mere bandits, Blackwood. Those are Astorian loyalists who will stop at nothing to reclaim their homeland." For the first time since grabbing Seraphina, uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's features. His carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than he could adjust. "Even if this fairy tale were true," he said desperately, "what makes you think she would choose a life of royal responsibility over the simple existence she's known? What makes you think she would choose you over security?" To everyone's surprise, it was Seraphina who answered, her voice steady despite the blade at her throat. "Because I have already made my choice." She looked directly at Prince Adrian, her violet eyes shining with newfound determination. "From the moment you showed me kindness when you had no obligation to do so, from the first time you treated me as a person rather than property, you had my heart. Princess or slave, my feelings remain the same." Adrian's face transformed with wonder and love, but he remained focused on the immediate danger. "Seraphina." As for responsibility, she continued, still addressing Adrian but speaking loudly enough for all to hear, if I truly am Princess of Astoria, then I have a duty to my people that I have neglected for 19 years through ignorance. I will not neglect it any longer through cowardice. Blackwood snarled in frustration. Pretty words from a girl who doesn't understand what she's saying. You think ruling is some romantic adventure? You think your precious prince will still love you when political necessity forces him to marry elsewhere for alliance? That, King Roderick said firmly, surprising everyone, will not be an issue. All eyes turned to the king, who was looking at his son with what might have been pride. Adrian has proven his wisdom in this matter. If Princess Seraphina will have him, she has my blessing to marry my son. The alliance between our kingdoms will be sealed by love rather than conquest. The revelation struck Blackwood like a physical blow. His grand scheme hadn't just failed, it had been turned completely against him. In that moment of shock, his grip loosened just enough. Seraphina, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed, twisted away from the blade and dropped to the floor. The moment Seraphina broke free from Lord Blackwood's grip, chaos erupted in the chapel. Royal guards surged forward, but the desperate nobleman was far from finished. With the skill of a trained warrior, he fought his way toward the chapel's rear exit, his blade flashing as he parried the guards' attempts to subdue him. He's heading for the stables, Prince Adrian shouted, leaping over pews to intercept the fleeing traitor. Don't let him reach his horse. But Blackwood had planned for this contingency. As he burst through the chapel doors, a group of his loyal retainers waited with fresh mounts and weapons. The sound of steel rang through the courtyard as battle erupted between Blackwood's men and the castle guards. Princess Seraphina, still wearing her blood-stained wedding dress, watched from the chapel doorway as Prince Adrian engaged Blackwood in single combat. The two men circled each other in the courtyard, their swords gleaming in the afternoon sun. You could have been rich beyond imagining, Blackwood panted as he parried Adrian's attacks. Instead, you've chosen love over power. How noble. How foolish. I've chosen justice over murder, Adrian replied, pressing his attack. And love over conquest. History will remember which choice was wiser. Their blades met with ringing force, and for a moment they were locked together, faces inches apart. She'll never be safe, Blackwood hissed. Even if you kill me, others will come for her crown. You've doomed her to a life of constant danger. Then I'll spend my life protecting her, Adrian said firmly, breaking the lock and stepping back. As will every loyal citizen of both our kingdoms. The battle was brief but fierce. Blackwood was skilled, but desperation made him reckless. As he lunged forward in a final, desperate attack, Adrian sidestepped and brought his sword up in a precise arc. Blackwood's blade went flying, and he fell to his knees, defeated. It's over, Adrian said, his sword at the traitor's throat. Surrender, and you'll face trial. Continue fighting, and die here in the dirt. Blackwood looked up at the prince, then at Seraphina standing in the chapel doorway, sunlight streaming through her golden hair like a halo. For a moment, his expression showed not anger but something almost like regret. She truly is beautiful, he said quietly. Beautiful enough to destroy kingdoms for. Then, with a sudden movement, he drew a hidden dagger and drove it toward his own heart rather than face the shame of public execution. Adrian tried to stop him, but it was too late. Lord Blackwood fell forward onto the cobblestones, his schemes and ambitions dying with him. In the silence that followed, Seraphina walked slowly toward Prince Adrian, her bare feet making no sound on the stones. The nobles and servants watched in amazement as the slave girl who had entered the chapel emerged as a princess, her bearing transformed by the knowledge of her true identity. It's truly over, she asked softly, reaching out to touch Adrian's face with gentle fingers. It's over, he confirmed, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. You're free, Princess Seraphina of Astoria. Free to choose your own destiny. She smiled then, the first truly happy smile anyone had seen from her in years. Then I choose you, Prince Adrian. I choose love over fear, hope over despair, and a future built together rather than kingdoms ruled alone. As they kissed in the courtyard, with the assembled court as witness, church bells began to ring throughout the kingdom. The sound carried far beyond the castle walls, announcing to all that justice had triumphed, love had conquered, and two kingdoms would soon be united not by conquest or political maneuvering, but by the simple, powerful bond between a prince who dared to love a slave and a princess who chose courage over safety. 6 months later, their wedding would be celebrated not as a political alliance, but as a love story that gave hope to anyone who believed that even in the darkest times, love could still triumph over power, and justice could still prevail over corruption. And in the rebuilt kingdom of Astoria, where Princess Serafina ruled wisely beside her prince consort, the people would long remember the story of how their queen was saved not by armies or gold, but by a single act of courage from a prince who believed that love was stronger than any crown. 1 year later, the kingdom of Astoria had risen from the ashes like a phoenix reborn. The once devastated lands now flourished under the joint rule of Queen Serafina and Prince Consort Adrian, their union having brought not only peace between the two kingdoms but prosperity that exceeded even the golden days of old. In the great hall of the restored Astorian palace, Serafina stood before a massive window overlooking the bustling capital city below. The simple servant's dress had long been replaced by royal robes of deep blue silk, but she still wore the sapphire pendant, now openly displayed as the symbol of her rightful claim to the throne. Her golden hair was crowned with a delicate circlet, and her violet eyes sparkled with the confidence of a woman who had found both her identity and her purpose. "The trade delegations from the eastern provinces have arrived, my queen," announced Sir Marcus, her newly appointed adviser, a former Astorian noble who had spent years in exile, waiting for this day. "They bring reports of record harvests and requests for expanded trade routes." Serafina smiled, still marveling at how naturally the title of queen had come to feel. "Excellent. Have them prepared for the afternoon council meeting. And ensure Prince Adrian is notified. His insights into our neighboring kingdoms will be invaluable." As Sir Marcus departed, Adrian entered through the chamber's side door, looking every inch the prince in his formal attire, yet his eyes still held the same warmth that had first drawn Serafina to him when she was nothing more than a frightened servant girl. "You look contemplative, my love," he said, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Thinking of the past." "Actually, I was thinking of the future," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "When I was scrubbing floors in your father's castle, I never could have imagined this life. Sometimes I wonder if it's all a dream I'll wake from." Adrian chuckled softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "If it is a dream, then we're sharing it. And I have no desire to wake up." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard below. A messenger had arrived, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding, bearing the colors of King Roderick's court. "It seems your father has news for us," Serafina observed, watching as guards escorted the messenger into the palace. Within minutes, the messenger was brought before them, still breathing heavily from his urgent journey. He bowed deeply before delivering his message. "Your Majesties, King Roderick sends his congratulations and urgent news. The northern kingdoms have formally recognized Queen Serafina's restoration and wish to establish new trade agreements. Furthermore, 3 noble houses that once served Lord Blackwood have come forward with evidence of additional conspiracies he had planned. They seek pardons in exchange for their testimony." Serafina exchanged a meaningful look with Adrian. Even in death, Blackwood's shadow continued to reach toward them, but each revelation only served to vindicate their actions and strengthen their position. "Tell my father we are grateful for this news," Adrian replied formally. "We will send our own delegation within the fortnight to discuss these matters in detail." After the messenger departed, Serafina moved to her writing desk, where correspondence from across the known world awaited her attention. Letters from other queens seeking counsel, requests for aid from kingdoms facing their own struggles, and reports from the network of spies and informants that every wise ruler required. "There's something else," Adrian said quietly, producing a sealed letter from his coat. "This arrived through more discreet channels. It concerns your cousin, Prince William of Astoria." Serafina's hand stilled on her quill. Her cousin, her father's nephew, had been presumed dead in the same civil war that had scattered her family. "He's alive. More than that. He's been building a resistance movement in the far eastern territories, believing himself to be the rightful heir to Astoria's throne. He doesn't know you survived. The implications were staggering. Another claimant to her throne, with what could be argued as an equally valid claim. In the old world of her father's time, this would have meant civil war, brother fighting brother for a crown. But Serafina was not her father, and this was not the old world. Arrange a meeting, she said firmly. In neutral territory, with guarantees of safe passage. If William truly cares for Astoria as I do, then we can find a solution that serves our people rather than our pride. Adrian smiled, and in that expression she saw the same admiration that had first bloomed when he watched a servant girl choose dignity over despair. This is why you're not just a queen, but a great queen. As the sun set over the restored kingdom of Astoria, Serafina reflected on the journey that had brought her from the depths of slavery to the heights of power. Every trial, every moment of despair, every act of cruelty she had endured, all of it had forged her into someone capable of ruling with both strength and compassion. The scared servant girl who had once prayed for the strength to endure had become a woman who no longer merely endured, but who actively shaped the world around her. And beside her stood a man who had proven that love was indeed stronger than any crown, because it was love that had given her the courage to claim her crown in the first place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new tests of her wisdom and resolve. But tonight, as she stood with Adrian watching their people celebrate in the streets below, Queen Serafina of Astoria knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, not as prince and slave, not even as king and queen, but as two souls who had found in each other the strength to change the world.